January 4, 1928. Southern Iraq. The ruins of ancient Ur. Before sunrise, the desert was silent except for the scrape of metal against hardened earth. Cold wind moved across the excavation trenches like a whisper passing through a graveyard. British archaeologist Leonard Woolley stood near the edge of a deep pit. He stared down into darkness lit only by flickering lanterns. No one was supposed to find this. For weeks, workers had been digging through layer after layer of collapsed mud brick. Most archaeologists believed the site had already surrendered its greatest secrets. The royal city of ancient Sumer had been excavated before. Temples had been mapped.
Inscriptions cataloged.
Graves emptied centuries ago by looters. And yet something beneath the dust made Woolley stop the excavation. At nearly 40 feet below the surface, one worker struck a layer unlike anything they had seen before. Not brick, not rubble. A compact wall of earth mixed with fragments of limestone and tiny beads of gold. Woolley climbed down carefully into the shaft. The air grew colder as he descended. You can almost feel the weight pressing above you. Thousands of years of silence sealed beneath Mesopotamia's soil. Then the lantern light caught something impossible. Gold. Not scattered coins. Not isolated jewelry. Entire objects emerging intact from the dirt. Delicate chains. Carved lapis lazuli. Gleaming headdresses still arranged as though someone had worn them yesterday. The workers froze. Ancient tomb robbers had stripped most royal burials in Mesopotamia long before modern archaeology existed. Yet here, buried beneath layers of earth and forgotten for over 4,000 years, was a chamber that appeared untouched. Woolley later described the moment as entering a dream of dead kings. But the deeper they dug, the stranger the discovery became. The chamber belonged not to a king, but to a queen. Her name was Pwabi. Near the entrance, archaeologists uncovered a cylinder seal carved with ancient cuneiform symbols identifying her status. She was no ordinary noblewoman. Inside the tomb lay extraordinary treasures unlike anything previously found in Mesopotamia. A massive golden headdress rested beside her skull, woven from sheets of hammered gold shaped into leaves and flowers. Strings of carnelian and lapis lazuli beads draped across the remains of her body. Nearby stood lyres decorated with bull heads made from gold and shell. Silver vessels lined the floor. Daggers with golden hilts lay untouched beside skeletal attendants. Everything remained exactly where it had been placed nearly 4,500 years earlier. And then came the detail that disturbed everyone in the trench. Pwabi had not been buried alone. One by one, more skeletons emerged from the earth surrounding the queen. Women wearing elaborate jewelry, soldiers with copper helmets, servants still positioned neatly in rows. At first glance, it looked ceremonial, peaceful even, but there were too many bodies. Woolley counted dozens, then more. Entire groups of attendants had descended into death beside their ruler. Some still held musical instruments in their hands. The excavation suddenly transformed from a treasure hunt into something darker. Who were these people? Why had they entered the tomb willingly? And perhaps most unsettling of all, had they been sacrificed? The cemetery beneath Ur contained more than 1,800 graves, 16 identified as royal tombs. Inside were chariots, weapons, precious stones imported from regions hundreds of miles away, from the Indus Valley to the mountains of Afghanistan. As night fell across the excavation camp, lanterns flickered against the walls of the burial pit. The deeper Leonard Woolley dug beneath Ur, the less the royal cemetery resembled an ordinary burial ground. It began to feel staged, carefully staged. By spring 1929, the excavation shafts had exposed what Woolley called the Great Death Pit. The name alone disturbed newspapers across Europe. Nearly 70 human bodies lay inside a single chamber beneath the desert floor, arranged with unnerving precision. Women wearing gold ribbons across their foreheads rested shoulder to shoulder in orderly rows. Harps and lyres lay beside musicians as though a performance had simply paused. Soldiers remained near the entrance, holding spears long corroded green with age. Nothing looked chaotic. No sign of struggle.
No scatterbones.
No frantic attempt to escape. Only silence. You step closer in your mind and begin to notice details that haunted the excavators most. Cups still near skeletal hands, jewelry perfectly aligned. Elaborate cosmetics preserved beside attendants who never left the tomb alive. It looked less like a massacre and more like a ceremony. Woolley became convinced the attendants had willingly followed their ruler into death, part of a sacred funerary ritual. They drank poison, laid themselves neatly, and quietly died beside their queen or king, to continue serving them in the afterlife. For decades, that explanation entered textbooks around the world. But some archaeologists were never fully convinced, because certain details refused to fit the story. The bodies had been arranged too perfectly. Helmets still sat upright. Instruments remained balanced beside fragile skeletons. Wooden chariots had collapsed over animal remains positioned with mathematical symmetry. How could dozens of people calmly accept death without panic? And if poison had been used, where was the evidence? The answer emerged decades later through technology Woolley never possessed. Modern forensic analysis of recovered skulls revealed something shocking. Several attendants showed signs of severe blunt force trauma to the head. Tiny fractures suggested heavy impacts from a narrow object, possibly a hammer-like tool. Some victims may not have died peacefully at all. They may have been executed. Suddenly, the royal tombs transformed from symbols of devotion into evidence of organized ritual killing. Yet even that explanation raised new questions. Why would an advanced civilization perform such elaborate human sacrifices? The people of Sumer were not primitive wanderers. They developed one of the earliest writing systems on Earth, cuneiform tablets. They built towering ziggurat temples that dominated city skylines. Their irrigation engineering turned harsh river plains into agricultural powerhouses. This was one of humanity's first urban civilizations. And still, entire groups of servants descended into royal graves beside their rulers. Inside the tombs lay lapis lazuli imported from what is now Afghanistan. Carnelian beads likely traveled from the distant Indus Valley civilization. Shells came from coastal waters hundreds of miles away. 4,500 years ago, UR sat at the center of vast trade routes. Evidence suggested bodies underwent preservation procedures, heat marks, and traces of mercury. Embalmment-like techniques may have been used to delay decomposition. Then came the legendary artifact, a ceremonial lyre crowned with a golden bull's head. Its eyes of shell and lapis lazuli seemed almost alive beneath the excavation lights. When civilization first rose from the mud of Mesopotamia, it may have demanded sacrifices history was unwilling to admit. By the 1930s, the Royal Cemetery of UR had become one of the most famous archaeological discoveries on Earth. Photographs of Queen Pwabi's golden headdress appeared in newspapers across Europe and America. Museums competed for artifacts. Scholars celebrated the excavation as proof of Sumerian sophistication. But beneath the excitement, doubts quietly grew. Historians studied the tombs, but the less certain they became about what had actually happened inside them. At first, the official explanation seemed elegant. Royal attendants willingly sacrificed themselves to accompany dead rulers. The orderly arrangement of bodies appeared almost ceremonial. Woolley described scenes that resembled peaceful sleep. Yet modern archaeologists began noticing contradictions. Some skull fractures looked violent. Certain skeletons showed signs of compression and repositioning after death. In several burial pits, chemical traces suggested bodies treated with heat or preservatives. This was not a simple funeral. It was an operation, and that realization changed everything. One theory proposed that attendants were killed elsewhere, preserved, then carefully arranged inside the tombs. Another suggested ceremonial intoxication followed by execution. Some researchers even questioned whether all the individuals buried together died at the same time. The famous death pits suddenly looked less like spontaneous devotion and more like controlled state rituals. you begin to understand why the discoveries disturbed scholars so deeply. These tombs emerged during the birth of organized urban civilization itself. Around 2600 BCE, UR stood among humanity's earliest experiments in centralized authority. Massive temples, bureaucracies, taxation systems, armies, and rigid social hierarchies developing simultaneously. Along the rivers of Mesopotamia, and perhaps the royal tombs revealed the hidden cost of that system: absolute power. The rulers buried beneath UR were not simply political leaders. In Sumerian belief, kingship carried divine legitimacy. Priests interpreted omens from the gods. Temples controlled resources. Religion and government fused together until obedience became sacred. If a ruler died, loyalty may not have ended at the grave. But another mystery complicated the story even further. Some scholars questioned whether the cemetery truly represented human sacrifice at all. What if the attendants were not victims? What if they belonged to an elite class chosen for cosmic burial rites now lost to history? Ancient Mesopotamian texts described elaborate journeys into the underworld, a shadowy realm ruled by powerful deities. Death was not viewed as annihilation but transition. Could the attendants have believed they were continuing their duties in another world? Or were they forced into death by a society that valued rulers above ordinary human life? No surviving text gives a clear answer, and that silence is terrifying, especially because the archaeological evidence itself remains incomplete. Many tombs had already been looted in antiquity. Organic materials decayed over millennia. Early excavation methods lacked the precision of modern archaeology. Some details were lost forever the moment objects were removed from the ground. Even Woolley's own interpretations became controversial. Critics argued he romanticized the discoveries as noble ritual rather than confronting brutality. Others defended him, noting that forensic science did not yet exist during his excavations. History itself became divided. Then another question emerged, one that unsettled archaeologists even more. Today, the desert around UR is quieter than it was when Leonard Woolley first descended into the royal cemetery nearly a century ago. Wind moves across broken mud-brick walls. Sand gathers in abandoned excavation trenches. The once great city of the Sumer kings sits beneath an endless Iraqi sky, its ziggurats still rising from the plain like the shadow of a vanished world. But beneath the silence, the dead of UR remain unresolved. Because despite decades of research, no one fully understands what happened inside the royal tombs. The greatest mystery is not the gold. It is the obedience. Why did dozens of attendants descend into death beside their rulers? The question lingers because every explanation feels incomplete. If they were sacrificed by force, why are the bodies arranged with such calm precision? Why are musical instruments still resting gently beside skeletal hands? Why do some attendants appear adorned as carefully as the rulers themselves? But if they entered willingly, something equally disturbing emerges. It would mean one of humanity's earliest urban civilizations created a belief system powerful enough to convince entire groups of people to die for royal authority. And that possibility changes how you view the ancient world. The royal cemetery no longer becomes merely an archaeological discovery. It becomes a mirror reflecting the origins of organized power itself. Modern scans and forensic studies continue uncovering details Woolley could never have imagined. Advanced analysis of skull fractures suggests deliberate execution methods. Chemical traces hint at preservation techniques. Isotope testing reveals some attendants may have come from distant regions rather than local populations. Even now, new evidence keeps reopening old questions. Who exactly were these people? Servants? Soldiers? Priests? Political captives? Devotees? No surviving text explains the ritual completely. And then there is Queen Pwabi herself. Unlike many ancient female figures known only through association with men, Pwabi appears to have held extraordinary authority independently. Her tomb overflowed with wealth equal to or surpassing many male rulers of her era. Yet historians still debate her exact role. Queen priestess, divine ruler, or something more complex entirely. Her name survives through a small carved seal buried beside her body for over 4,000 years. Without that object, history may have forgotten her completely. That realization haunts archaeologists, because UR demonstrates how fragile civilization's memory truly is. The people buried there invented systems that shaped human history: writing, administration, monumental architecture, long-distance trade. Their influence echoes through every later civilization in Mesopotamia and beyond. Yet most of their stories vanished. You can walk through museums today and stare into the empty eye sockets of the famous bull-headed liars. You can study the intricate gold leaves of Pwabi's headdress. You can admire craftsmanship so refined it feels almost modern. But the people themselves remain distant silhouettes. We know what they buried. We do not know what they feared. And perhaps the most unsettling mystery lies beyond the tombs entirely. The royal cemetery of UR emerged during a pivotal moment in human development, when villages transformed into cities and rulers transformed into institutions. Hierarchies hardened, armies expanded, religious authority fused with political control. Civilization was becoming permanent. The tombs may preserve evidence of that transformation more honestly than written history ever could. Because beneath the beauty of the artifacts lies a warning hidden inside the foundations of the first cities. Power demanded spectacle. It demanded obedience. And sometimes, it demanded death. Archaeologists often describe the discovery of UR as one of the greatest triumphs of 20th century archaeology. And in many ways, it was. Woolley revealed an entire forgotten chapter of human civilization buried beneath the sands of Iraq. As darkness settles again over the ruins of UR, the ancient cemetery returns to silence. Yet the central mystery refuses to die.